he started screaming my name. He was like, "Marcus, man, you gotta help me. I need help, Marcus." That it got so intense that I actually put my weapon down and covered my ears because I couldn't stand to hear him die.
June 2005, Afghanistan's Kunar province. The U.S. military launched Operation Red Wings with a clear objective: capture or kill Ahmad Shah, a local insurgent leader commanding a group known as the Mountain Tigers. What followed would become one of the deadliest special operations disasters in modern military history. Kunar province was unforgiving. Mountains rose vertically, valleys cut deep between ridgelines, creating dead zones where radios failed. The province sat along the Pakistani border where insurgents moved freely. Terrain favored defenders, and communication was difficult for coalition forces, but easy for locals. The operation didn't start as a SEAL mission. The Marines of the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, had developed the intelligence, identified the target, and planned the operation. Ahmad Shah was considered a lower priority target. The Marines had already captured all known higher and mid-level threats in the region through methodical operations over previous months. Shah and his Mountain Tigers were more of a cleanup target than a primary objective. But there was a problem. The Marines lacked the helicopter assets needed to execute the mission. They requested support from the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. The SEALs overseeing the Special Operations Task Force in Afghanistan agreed to provide the helicopters, but on one condition. They would take over the entire operation. They would lead the reconnaissance. They would serve as the main assault force. The Marines would be relegated to securing the outer perimeter. With limited options, the Marines agreed. Special Operations Command often assumed control of operations developed by conventional units. It was standard practice, but units that developed intelligence and understood the local terrain were pushed aside in favor of Special Operations forces who might be seeing the area for the first time. In this case, the change in leadership would prove catastrophic. The Marines had prepared carefully. They intended to use a 6-person scout sniper team led by a highly experienced leader who had conducted previous operations in this exact terrain. He knew which valleys swallowed radio signals and how local fighters used the landscape. The Marine plan was methodical: insert several miles from the target area to avoid detection, move on foot through terrain they had already studied, carry powerful radios specifically selected for mountain operations. They had multiple contingency plans for compromise with the predetermined rally points and extraction alternatives. When the SEALs took over reconnaissance, they assembled a 4-person team. None had experience conducting reconnaissance operations in Afghanistan. Only one member, Marcus Luttrell, had prior combat deployment experience. For 3 of the 4 men, this was their first war zone. The Marines specifically warned the SEALs that their standard radios wouldn't work in these mountains. The advice came from hard-won experience and was ignored. The SEAL team carried a weak MBIT radio and a satellite phone. No layered backup, no alternate frequencies, no relay plan. The SEALs modified the insertion plan. Instead of landing miles away and moving on foot, the helicopter would insert them just a few hundred meters from the observation point. Less walking meant less chance of detection. Get in fast, set up observation, call in the assault force. In the week prior, the 160 SOAR helicopters conducted multiple false insertions throughout the valley. The Night Stalkers would come in at different times, different locations, making it appear they were inserting teams everywhere. The idea seemed tactically sound: confuse the enemy about where the real reconnaissance team would operate. The tactic backfired completely. In a remote mountain valley, the sound of an MH-47 Chinook doesn't blend into the background. It announces American operations. Each false insertion primed the local population and Shah's fighters. By mission day, every fighting-age male in the region knew coalition forces were conducting operations. They were ready and watching. The MH-47 came in fast on the actual insertion. The SEAL team fast-roped onto the landing zone in seconds. Standard procedure required disconnecting the ropes from the helicopter and concealing them. This step was either skipped entirely or executed so poorly it made no difference. Local residents heard the distinctive rotor wash, found the ropes quickly, and reported it. The communication network in rural Afghanistan was surprisingly effective. The SEAL team moved to higher ground, searching for a position to observe the valley where Ahmad Shah's Mountain Tigers operated. They didn't know the entire region already had their approximate location. Ahmad Shah's fighters understood American rules of engagement better than many commanders realized. They had refined their tactics through years of observing coalition operations. They sent a deliberate reconnaissance probe. Unarmed men with radios herding sheep straight into the hills where the SEAL team was hiding. This counter-reconnaissance tactic had been used successfully across Iraq and Afghanistan. In Iraq, insurgents would send children or unarmed adults to inspect buildings. In Afghanistan, they used herders. The logic was simple and effective. If the scouts found coalition forces and returned safely, you confirmed the position without losing fighters. If they didn't return on schedule, their absence told you coalition forces were nearby and had detained or moved them. The herders found the SEAL team's position. At that moment, the team was soft compromised. They knew they'd been spotted, but they were also hard compromised in a way they didn't fully understand. These weren't random shepherds who stumbled onto them. This was a deliberate enemy reconnaissance operation. When these specific men failed to return to the village on time, Shah would know his fighters had made contact. The team detained the herders. Then came a debate that should never have happened in the field. They had no formal plan for compromise. The Marine reconnaissance team would have had predetermined responses, rehearsed actions for exactly this scenario. The SEAL team was making decisions on the spot. Some accounts suggest they even voted on what to do. Killing the herders was never a legal or realistic option, despite what some later accounts suggested. These were unarmed civilians showing no hostile intent. The rules of engagement were unambiguous. The team released them and moved to higher ground, attempting to radio command. The radios failed as the Marines had predicted. Deep in the valley, surrounded by mountains, their weak signal couldn't reach base. The herders returned to the village. Within minutes, 10 to 15 fighters knew the SEAL team's exact location, their number, and what weapons they carried. Shah's men moved immediately. 10 to 15 fighters moved quickly through terrain they'd known since childhood. They understood exactly where the SEAL team would move, searching for better radio coverage. The ravines and draws that led back toward higher ground were obvious routes. They positioned themselves along the path, setting up a textbook L-shaped ambush. RPG gunners took positions overlooking the likely landing zone, ready for the inevitable rescue attempt. The SEAL team moved back toward higher ground, desperate to find a spot where the satellite phone would function. At close range, the ambush was sprung. Fighters armed with PKM machine guns and AK-47s opened fire from elevated positions. The SEALs were in a kill zone with terrain channeling them exactly where the insurgents wanted. The firefight was brutal and one-sided. Marcus Luttrell tumbled down the mountainside, breaking bones as he fell, but somehow surviving. Mike Murphy, the team leader, understood they were dying without help. The satellite phone needed line of sight to the satellite. That meant open ground, exposed to enemy fire. Murphy moved into the open. Completely exposed, he made the call that would reach the operations center and trigger the rescue attempt.
Mikey was out, had pushed out onto this boulder out in the middle of the draw, and this wide open, no cover, no nothing. He was on our satellite phone.
He stayed on the line, ensuring the message got through even as he was shot. That action would posthumously earn him the Medal of Honor.
Took 2 rounds through the chest because he spun like a top, and it dropped him. And I tried to wait. I made my way up to him. You know, he's my best friend, and I'd already lost Danny, and I knew that Axe was dying. I didn't want to lose him. And then he started to crawl left, and I was out in the open, waving my hands. I was like, just come down to me. That's all I wanted him to do, was just come down to me.
Danny Dietz fought desperately, wounded multiple times before he was killed. Matthew Axelson also died in the running gun fight that cascaded down the mountain. The fight lasted minutes, not hours. Insurgent video footage recovered later showed portions of the battle, though accounts conflict about whether RPGs and mortars were used in the initial ambush. What wasn't in dispute was the outcome. The insurgents had eliminated the reconnaissance team before American air power could respond. 8 SEALs boarded an MH-47 Chinook from the 160 SOAR. 2 Apache gunships were assigned to escort the rescue attempt, but the quick reaction force itself revealed a critical flaw in preparation. It wasn't a designated, rehearsed team trained to respond together. It was assembled from whoever happened to be available at that moment. Some were SEALs from SEAL Team 10, others were support personnel. The unit cohesion wasn't there. The SEAL mission commander aboard the Chinook made a decision driven by urgency. The team on the ground was dying. Get to the landing zone fast. The Chinook was faster than the Apaches. Following the commander's directive, it pulled ahead of the escort aircraft and arrived at the landing zone first in broad daylight, without Apache support. The Apache's thermal optics could have scanned the terrain and identified threats before the Chinook exposed itself. The Apache's 30mm cannons and Hellfire missiles could have suppressed enemy positions. None of that protective capability was in place when the Chinook began its approach. Ropes deployed from the helicopter. Men prepared to fast rope to the ground. Some had already started descending when the RPG hit the aircraft. Mike Glover, a Green Beret who participated in the recovery operation days later, described what the bodies revealed. Some of the men recovered weren't destroyed by the crash impact. They were relatively intact. That told a horrific story. Those men had been on the ropes descending through the air when the helicopter was struck by the RPG. They fell from the ropes before the aircraft even went down. The Chinook, severely damaged, attempted to gain elevation. The pilot fought desperately for control. The aircraft clipped the top of a ridgeline as it tried to climb, then crashed into the mountainside and rolled down the slope. Everyone aboard died. 16 men in seconds, 8 SEALs from SEAL Team 10, 8 Special Operations aviators from the 160 SOAR. The RPG gunner had been positioned exactly where Shah's fighters knew the rescue would come. They understood American rescue doctrine. They had set the trap perfectly. The next day, a different approach was taken. Army Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment deployed along with other Special Operations personnel. They had learned from the previous day's catastrophe. They landed at a separate location, away from known enemy positions, and moved on foot through the difficult terrain. No more direct insertions onto hot landing zones. The Rangers found Marcus Luttrell in a village under the protection of Mohammed Gulab, a local Pashtun man. Gulab had discovered Luttrell and taken him in under Pashtunwali, the traditional code that demands protection of guests regardless of personal risk to the host. When the Rangers extracted Luttrell, they discovered his rifle magazines were still fully loaded. Despite falling down a mountain, hiding from enemy fighters, and evading capture for over a day, he had preserved his ammunition. He was the only survivor of the 4-man team. The Rangers secured the helicopter crash site, a grim task in hostile territory. They recovered all 16 bodies from the wreckage scattered down the mountainside. They retrieved all SEAL weapons and equipment, ensuring nothing of value remained for enemy propaganda or exploitation. During their methodical search of the area, they recovered insurgent video footage of the battle against the 4-man team. But Ahmad Shah had already claimed a significant prize. The SEALs had brought a computer on the mission for intelligence gathering or operational planning. Shah's fighters found it after the ambush. When they accessed it, they discovered blueprints of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, information about other American facilities, and operational details that should never have been in the field on a reconnaissance mission. Shah combined this intelligence windfall with the battle footage into a propaganda video that proved devastatingly effective. The video showed American Special Operations forces being defeated by local fighters. It showed captured equipment and intelligence. It demonstrated that even elite U.S. forces could be ambushed and killed in Afghanistan's mountains. The impact was immediate. Funding poured in from insurgent support networks. Recruitment surged as young fighters wanted to join the commander who had defeated the Americans. Ahmad Shah, transformed from a lower priority target, someone the Marines had planned to capture almost as an afterthought, into a legitimate high-value target commanding significant resources and respect. Operation Red Wings had achieved the opposite of its objective. 3rd Special Forces Group was stationed at Camp Vance, positioned right next door to where SEAL Team 10 was based. The 2 elite units were neighbors, operating in the same battle space, facing the same enemy networks. Yet despite this physical proximity, there had been almost no coordination or information sharing between them before Operation Red Wings. The lack of crosstalk between special operations units, even those literally working next door to each other, would later be identified as a systemic failure. After the disaster, everything changed. Mike Glover, a Green Beret team sergeant with 3rd Special Forces Group, described what followed. All 6 detachments in the company, spread across the border region in different fire bases and camps, went on the offensive simultaneously. They conducted aggressive operations specifically targeting insurgent networks in retaliation for the deaths. This wasn't strategic patience or intelligence gathering. This was about vengeance and sending an unmistakable message. In Konar Valley, Glover's own team pushed deep into terrorist safe havens, with Marine artillery units providing fire support from established positions. Glover personally called in artillery strikes on enemy positions, walking rounds onto targets. Apache helicopters worked the ridge lines continuously, firing until they went Winchester, expending all ammunition, then flying back to rearm and returning to continue the fight. During these intensive operations, another MH-47 Chinook crashed in the area. This time, enemy fire wasn't the cause. Mechanical failure brought the aircraft down in the brutal mountain terrain. The helicopter went down in hostile territory where recovery would risk more American lives. Rather than attempt a dangerous recovery operation, Command made the decision to destroy it. A JDAM precision-guided bomb was dropped on the downed Chinook, ensuring no systems, equipment, or intelligence could be exploited by enemy fighters. The Retribution operations continued for 4 months after Operation Red Wings. Glover and his fellow Green Berets conducted what he later bluntly described as a lot of killing to get vengeance and justice for the 19 men who died. Before Operation Red Wings launched, 3rd Special Forces Group's Halo team, ODA 364, was offered the mission with 12 men. The team sergeant evaluated the plan and turned it down. The area was too dangerous for that size element. That warning was ignored. The mission went to SEAL Team 10, who sent 4 men. Marcus Luttrell was debriefed before leaving country. Joint Personnel Recovery sent detailed after-action reports. The mistakes were documented, but according to Mike Glover, those lessons were never properly implemented. There was no adequate system for cross-communication between units operating in the same areas. SEAL Team 10 and 3rd Group were neighbors but operated independently. The Quick Reaction Force highlighted the lack of preparation. It was assembled from whoever was available rather than being a designated, rehearsed team. Glover said he gets sick thinking about Murphy, Dietz, Axelson, and Luttrell fighting overwhelmed in terrain that favored the ambush. Mistakes were made on all ends and need to be discussed to prevent future disasters. His question remains, how do you support 4 guys being attacked by a much larger force? There needs to be planning and assets in the air. Those mechanisms weren't in place during Operation Red Wings. 19 American service members died during Operation Red Wings, 11 SEALs and 8 Army Special Operations aviators. The operation failed to capture Ahmad Shah. Instead, it elevated him to greater power. The men who died were warriors who followed orders with courage. Mike Murphy exposed himself to enemy fire to make a call that might save his team. Earning the Medal of Honor, Dietz, Axelson, and the 16 men on the Chinook died trying to help their brothers. But courage cannot overcome flawed planning. Warnings were ignored. Experience was dismissed. Glover emphasized these conversations must happen to ensure future operators avoid the same mistakes. The lessons were documented. Luttrell's debrief detailed what went wrong. But they were never adequately implemented. Cross-communication between units never significantly improved. Operation Red Wings remains one of the deadliest special operations missions in modern history. Not because the enemy was sophisticated, but because foundational planning was flawed and warnings were not heeded.